नमस्कार, आदाब, खुशामदीद, वणक्कम, எப்படி இருக்கீங்க? ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿದ್ದೀರಾ? ಚಾಕ್ ಹೆಚ್ಚು? কেমন ছিল? येन्न पुदर साहिल किनी आणि आजी तुमगेल मुका रबुन मका भारी खुश होतस. Can anybody tell me how many languages I ran through just now? 8. You're right, including English. That's 8. And the reason I did that is to put into context this saying that I really like, I really love. It says, "Kos pe badle pani, char kos pe vani." That basically means every 4 kilometers the water changes, and every 16 the language. And this is India we're talking about. Do you have any clue how many languages India has today? Any answers? No? Major, yes. So there are 786 languages in India and about 86 scripts. Like the gentleman pointed out, we have about 29 languages spoken by at least 1 million speakers and 22 that are recognized by the Constitution. And if you look on the back of your note, there are 15 languages on it, of a currency note. The internet really is no different. If you look at the internet today, and this is the number of speakers in millions, internet has close to around 270 million mobile internet users today, of which only 125 are English speakers. 125 million, that basically means every English language speaker is already on the internet. And we've got about a little more than that that are basically local language users. So that to me is actually a tremendous thought. And what's interesting is that, so now that we've given the split of what English versus non-English looks like on the internet, let's look at the content on the internet. 56% of all the content on the internet is in English. Right? The other big languages are Russian, German, Chinese, French, and Korean, and Japanese in that order, I think. That's how it goes. But if we take these languages, basically between Europe and Europe and Australia, we've got plenty of languages, but if I take the major 130 languages, less than 0.1% of the content of the internet is in those languages. Now, if I look at other media outside of the internet, right, outside of web content particularly, these are the top 3 English language newspapers in the country today. Anyone wants to guess what position they are in terms of circulation? This is their position in terms of circulation across all newspapers in India. So the Times of India has done fairly well, number 2. Hindu is at number 12 and Hindustan Times at number 13. And these are the only 3 English language newspapers in the top 20 by circulation in the country. Everything else is in local languages. So your Dainik Bhaskars, your ABPs, your Malayalam Manoramas, these are the newspapers that actually dominate circulation. They thrash any English language newspaper. Now if I take news on digital media, and I actually just did news and magazines category top downloads, right, top apps, and these are the Hindi apps. These are the local language apps, so to speak. And we're very fortunate to have one of the founders of News Hunt and Daily Hunt, Virendra Gupta, with us on the panel today. That's the top app. I think he'll give you the download figures, but I do know that more than 70%, possibly more than that as well, are all in local language, his usage. It's the most popular news app in the country. If you look at TV channels, the story is no different. We've got 1,148 TV channels today, according to circulation figures. And we've got 102 English channels, which seems like a lot. But when you compare it to local languages, it's 10x that. So even in mindshare and media, you look at, well, let's look at Bollywood and Hollywood in India. Who wins? Any guesses? Well, To me, Sholay will always win, as it should. But if you look at it in terms of numbers, box office collections last year, 12,000 crores for Bollywood, less than 2,000 crores for Hollywood in India. So pretty much everywhere you look, the story continues. This is, how many of you are part of a family WhatsApp group? Everyone. Yeah, no, nobody spared that. Once you join WhatsApp, you're ruined, right? How many of you receive messages in local languages every day? I do, at least, right? So these facts, the circulation figures, movie box office collections, WhatsApp, basically tells me wherever there is content, people are very, very hungry to consume it. And wherever you give them the ability to create content or even forward content, immediately it starts moving in local languages, right? But when you look at the internet itself, if I look at web and mobile applications, where we spend a lot of our time, right? Outside of YouTube, Ghana.com, where there is local language media, or a Hangama where there is local language media available. Outside of that and outside of WhatsApp, where you can easily forward a vernacular this thing, the web really is in English, as we made that point before. So people have made attempts at translation before, because to them localization is translation. And it results in something like this. So this is a listing product description page of a popular e-commerce site. And this was when they were trying out translation through one of these localization vendors, right? Now, it's hard to read from where you're looking at, but the first thing you'll notice is that it's not fully localized, right? So there's already, that's the translated side, and you can see English there. And if we look at, so if you go line by line, you start finding interesting ways in which translation or automated translation fails, right? So if I look at brand, on the left it says John Players. Anyone want to take a guess what it says on the right? It says John Khiladion. Okay, so you shouldn't be doing that to brand names. You should be ideally transliterating them, which is where you take the name and you just change the script. So if I were to write your name in Devanagari, that's how you would want to do it to a brand. You don't literally translate it, right? There are more fun things. For example, it's sleeve. And who knows the Hindi translation for sleeve? Asteen. So I didn't know that, right? I only knew Asteen as Asteen ka Saap. Right? To me, sleeve was baju, which is a more kind of colloquial word. And a lot of Hindi speakers that I spoke to, when I said Asteen, they were like, but I'm not so sure what that means. So again, with localization, you need to take into consideration colloquial usage, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But you can't just take one translation algorithm and hammer it through text and hope for good results. That's why you try out Google Translate on a website and you go, this doesn't make any sense, right? So it hasn't worked before because people haven't built the full stack user experience. And by full stack user experience, this is exactly what I mean. When I say localization, when I say local languages, they go, oh, translation. No, translation is just one small part of it, one very, very small part of it. It's one of many layers, right? So first thing that you need to solve for is fonts and font rendering, because not every phone can show every language. Because to show a particular font, you need to support the rendering engine in that. So fonts and font rendering come at the start. Then comes language input. So can I type in that language? Can I type in different languages? So we'll come to that. Then comes translation and transliteration. Then comes finally the holy grail search. So we'll talk about each of these, right? So user input. So this is the keyboard of called Swalek. It's developed by Reverie Language Technologies. Arvind Pani is with us today. He'll participate in the panel. And I really like this keyboard for a couple of reasons. So firstly, the first problem with keyboards is there's no standard layout for native text, right? So this is Swalek's layout. SwiftKey has another layout. Google has another layout. Everybody's got a different layout of keyboards. So that's the first problem. Everybody needs to get together and decide on what's the best. Only problem is not enough people have done it to figure out what is the best, right? So QWERTY and Dvorak and all these things were figured out a long time ago, but nobody's yet figured out how to do a soft touch keyboard for native language. I think this is a particularly good attempt, mostly because it supports different modes, right? It doesn't just say, when I type in Hindi, it doesn't just give me a letter, a block of kakagagana and say figure it out, because even for me who's been using this product for a while, or for anybody who knows the language, the moment they're faced with a local language keyboard, even if you're a fluent Hindi speaker, you go, ye kahan hai? So it takes some difficulty, which is why this mode, for example, is very helpful for us, which is, this is called transliterative mode input. Basically, you type, for example, I'm typing bhashaएं and you can see bhashaएं coming that way, right? And it just switches to that language later, because we are more comfortable reading than we are typing out, right? And also another use case would be, you don't really know the script, but you're sending a message to your mother and she can't read anything but Kannada, so you type in English and she can read in Kannada, as long as you know the language. So I think modes of user input and swipe to type, and keyboards are a huge area of innovation. We would, the touchscreen phones would never have worked today if auto suggest and swipe and all these things weren't helping you out every step of the way. And each of these innovations need to be ported into a local language keyboard. So it's not as simple. And if you look at multiple local language keyboards, you'll experience that, right? The other thing that I wanted to show you is localization is not translation. And one, can you play this video, please?
रास्ते में कोई कष्ट तो नहीं हुआ? खाना वाना खाया?
जी हाँ, भोजन तो हमने लौपथगामी स्थल पर ही कर लिया था।
क्या?
जी हाँ, लौपथगामी अग्निरथ से आए हैं ना।
ओह, ट्रेन से आए हो? ट्रेन से?
जी हाँ, अंग्रेजी भाषा में यही कहते हैं, परंतु हिंदी बोलते समय हम अंग्रेजी शब्दों का प्रयोग उचित नहीं समझते।
अरे इसमें हंसने की क्या बात है? व्हाट नॉनसेंस!
व्हाट नॉनसेंस नहीं, क्या बकवास है कहीं। अब हिंदी बोलते समय अंग्रेजी के शब्दों का प्रयोग।
My favorite movies, Chupke Chupke. If you haven't seen it, it's free on YouTube and it's legal, so watch it. But it's the whole movie actually is a big trip on language. There's a lot of talk about how English is such a strange language, and there are several examples of this. So there in the video you saw a classic example of over translation, right? Everybody knows train as train. In fact, you talk to a driver, you talk to anybody in the hinterland also, train pakadna. Nobody says Lopatgami Agnirath, but that's the technical correct term, right? At the same time, which is why I said using colloquial language is very, very important. Don't immediately translate a word. In some cases you might want to transliterate. So having that is very important. The other thing that's important while you're doing localization, and I use that word deliberately instead of translation, is context. So what do I mean by context? So if I asked you to translate the word play into Hindi, anyone can offer me a translation? Khel, excellent. Khelo if it's sports, right? What if I was talking about music? It'd be bajao. What if I said play in say it was a nice Shabana Azmi play, becomes natak. So without context, the translation is meaningless, because I can drop any of these three words, and there are several examples in language like this. So I need to know what I'm talking about before I can tell you what a good translation is. So this is why open domain translation or universal translation, which is what Google and all tries to do, will never work as at business grade. It will never be as good as you would want it to be. To achieve business grade translation, one of the things that you have to do is know the context of the domain. So the way you do translations for a Flipkart will be very different from the way you do a translation for an HDFC bank, which will be very different from the way you do a translation for, I don't know, Cricinfo. Right? So a bat and a bat are different things. So this is key. So now if you've done all of this right, if you managed to render local language fonts everywhere, if you've done language input in multiple modes and you've done it well, you know when to translate, when to transliterate, how to translate given a given context, only then can you hope to do search. Because search really is the holy grail. Because you can create all the content you want in local languages, but if you can't discover it, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, the internet exploded after Google came. If I can't go to an e-commerce website and just type what I want, and then I have to go through the entire menu, I will be quite frustrated. And same thing goes for databases or anything else. Right? So search requires you, think about it, it requires you to type in local languages. It has to understand what you're saying, so it needs to do domain specific reverse translation, I guess, into English, and then do the regular search and show up the results which again have to come back to you in a local language. So this really is the key, and unless unless you're offered a localization solution which includes search, it's terribly incomplete. So what does it look like when it's done right? So I've seen a couple of interesting examples of localization and some notable guys, a couple of guys, one of the startups recently has done it themselves and they've done a great job called Mubble. They have a very nice localized menu. And this is Reveries example, so I thought I'd show this to you. This is the Hdfc Securities app, which basically they put in an SDK and integrate a series of APIs within the code, and the code essentially at the time of rendering changes the entire English into local languages. Can you play the video, please? So it even has search, right? So you type for Tata and then you can find the stock, it loads the whole thing. You can change languages. It chose, I think, what did he choose? Gujarati. There you go. Changes to Gujarati. So and it's a fairly comprehensive. The entire experience of the app is now in local language. There's no translation alone and leave the rest. Leave you to fend for yourself. So this is one very interesting example. They have an API there. I finally want to end by saying end this talk, because then we'll call on the panel. Local languages are sexy. And what do I mean by sexy? So I call it stickiness, engagement, and conversion for the common man. So to me, when I've got a lot of buddies in the e-commerce ecosystem, and whenever I talk to them, they tell me I care only about three things: stickiness, engagement, and conversion. Stickiness basically means that once I download the app, the fellow keeps my app and keeps using it. Uninstall rates are huge in India right now. We're at 70% uninstall rate, I think, on average. So broadly, all the download numbers you see, you can immediately discount by 70% if you're talking about active users. So one of the key reasons I would think for such a high uninstall rate is the fact that they can't understand what you're saying because they don't speak your language. Right? If you look at the internet figures, and I say there are 270 million people and more than half of that are in local languages, and then how can you assume that you won't have at least 50% uninstall rate? Minimum to hoga hi. And then the rest might be because you need to improve your app in here or there. But if I give let's say my father, he speaks English quite well, but he still reads newspaper in Kannada, so he prefers Kannada. So if I were to give him two apps to do whatever, hotel bookings or flight bookings, and I said one can do it in Kannada and one can only do it in English, which one do you think he'd prefer? I think and I think if you ask that question of yourself with your friends and your family, you'll see that answer come again and again. They might even in the 120 million people who can speak English, there's a significant proportion which prefers a local language. And then the next is engagement. So I hear a lot of talk again about getting users to be engaged in the app, getting them to try out new flows, new offers, new features of the app. Again, the problem is people are struggling to use your core feature. So I spent a lot of time since I got interested in local languages, talking to taxi drivers, cigarette shop owners, anybody. Basically, you go out onto the road and you point at anyone, they're likely not to be able to speak English but have a smartphone. Okay, this is my experience in Bombay. I go up in Bangalore. So I go up to them and I talk to them, how do you shop? Do you buy things online? Some of them do. And say, how do you shop? He's like, photo leke lete hain sir, photo dekh ke lete hain. And I said, but how do you know whether it's on this thing? Tab dost ko bulate. That's when we call our friends. Right? So there will be one designated person who can speak English, and that will be the person who will do this. This is not, and you're sitting here worrying about what color the buy now button should be. Right? We talk about growth, and there's this entire pocket of growth that we ignore. We ignore because we're in an English echo chamber. Conversion is the same thing. Conversion right now, we are at good companies have conversions of around 3% of active users to buy, right? What do you think is going to happen? We are adding 20 million mobile internet users every quarter, which means we'll have 500 million, 500 million people in 2017 online. Only 100 million people can speak English, 120 if you're being generous. So then the question becomes, what's going to happen to your conversion? The short answer is going to go to hell. But unless you do local languages. Right? And the last C is for the common man. All of this is for the common man. I mean, we are the elite. We are the 1% of the 1%. Right? We've got a lovely education. We're sitting here in this air-conditioned room. India is not like that. We know it. We choose to ignore it. But I don't think we can choose to do that as far as the internet is concerned and the ecosystem is concerned. So this is where I kind of want to make this point where I was fortunate. I grew up in a port town, Mangalore, and Mangalore is on the Kerala border also, Karnataka-Kerala border. And so I grew up speaking 5 languages, right? So English, Kannada state language, Hindi, Amitabh Bachchan and Chole. Tudu is the local language spoken in Mangalore. Konkani is my mother tongue. And then I studied in Madras, so I learned a little bit of Tamil. My wife is Bengali. When you speak to people in their language, it's the point I wanted to make, that it's not transactional when you speak to them in their language. If you've just met a stranger and suddenly realize you share a language and start speaking to them, you become friends faster. Because it's sentimental. We are sentimental about languages. Indians are, and we don't. It's also the language of business everywhere. So I say, I mean, there's this lovely Nelson Mandela quote that if you speak to a stranger in a different language, you can talk to him, but you speak to him in his language, you'll touch his heart. Right? So this to me is essentially the theme, and I wanted to set up this panel. We've got 3 lovely panelists with us today. I just wanted to end this by saying Jai Hind, right, for us. 3 lovely panelists, Arvind Pani, who is the founder and CEO of Reverie. Arvind, please. Virendra Gupta, founder and CEO of Daily Hunt, formerly known as News Hunt. Please give him a big hand of applause. And Shantanu Bhattacharya, SVP of Analytics at Delivery. So I thought we could go into a brief discussion on local languages based on what we briefly talked about. I thought we could go around the table and introduce ourselves, and then we can go into the broader discussion. Arvind, shall we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hi, good morning everybody. My name is Arvind. I'm co-founder of Reverie Language Technologies. In one simple statement, if I have to state what we do, we work towards language equality on the internet. This is one of the things that I always say, that India was physically ruled by English 200 years back. Today we are digitally ruled by English. And that's what we are trying to remove. And that is what Reverie is all about. We have a platform that can take any business which is digitally present today in English. We can do that for 50 languages of the world. Today we are focusing on in India, but we also have plans to get into Middle East and other regions in about a year's time from now. Thank you.
I'm Viru Gupta. I represent a company called Daily Hunt, which was formerly News Hunt. We are the largest local language news and ebook app. Our mission is to be the first and the preferred choice of local content consumption stop for a local language user and be a discovery for products and services for them. We are pretty proud of building a business which is local to the country, and it's not done anywhere else. I think Sahil has mentioned everything about why local language market is a big market. The size of the market and the ambition to do something for this country drives us day in and day out to do what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Sahil, that was an awesome introduction. You stole a lot of my speaking points. So now in real time, I'm thinking what else to say. So my name is Shantanu Bhattacharya. I run the data science in a company called Delivery, which is a logistics service provider. Prior life, I was running Facebook's emerging market product out of Menlo Park. So that's where my interest in local languages come. If you think of India as a market, so I used to describe India back in my days when I was running the product as a Bengali. So Bengalis have two emotional attachments. One is their language, the second is fish. So India is a fish market. If you think of it this way, and a fish has a head, a body, and a tail. So the 120 million, and the head is where a lot of nutrition and protein is, body is where the mass is, and the tail is, you have to work with the tail to make some use out of it. So if you think of it this way, 120 million users today are essentially the head of the fish. The body is still left, the 700 million users that are local language is still left to be discovered, right? Discover, explode, and to be brought on the mainstream internet. If you think from the perspective of, and Sal gave a lot of the statistics, if you think from the perspective of your local TV ads, 4 out of 5 ads today are in local languages. Newspaper, 80% plus of the readership is in local languages. You can go to the pockets of the country. Think of Chickpet in Bangalore, where you can enter that area. There are several people sitting there who are Indian billionaires, like 1,000 crore plus, and they have never spoken in any language. They do understand Hindi, they do understand some English, but they've done their business, they have run their life in Canada and still made a good living out of it. Similar examples exist in, you can go to Kanchivaram, you can go to Ludhiana, you can go to parts of Calcutta, and people have run their life without knowing or understanding English or not being conversant or expert in it, right? So there lies an opportunity to go and monetize the population that has been monetized in every other way on the digital media. It hasn't come yet, and there have been several barriers around it, why it hasn't happened. But I think with the two things that happened, one is the rise of smartphones, and the second is the rise of what I'd call is the falling data prices are now connecting people to the internet for the first time. And it's our job to essentially go figure out how to keep them engaged, keep them converted, from being non-data user to a data user, and essentially build an ecosystem that sort of replicates what you see in the other medias, namely the TVs and the newspaper and every other media. So that's where my interest lies.
Excellent. Thanks. So I have a lapel mic. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about, we've talked a lot about how there is not enough content in local languages on the internet, on the mobile internet. Why has this been the case? Is it because is this problem new? And how do you see people reacting to this challenge now that it's cropped up? So a few thoughts maybe around the table, folks.
So there are multiple reasons why the local language content never became digital. I think it all starts with whether your content is digital or not. Right? Unicode was developed keeping English in mind. Nobody even thought of, billions of people are out there and who speak multiple languages. Since you didn't have easy tools to write a content, the content never became digital, right? So that was the first part, that why did local language content is not on internet, not on mobile. Now, the other thing which has happened in a country like us is that we have leapfrogged internet from PC to mobile. So nobody had a motivation. See, anything which you do requires a motivation. Nobody had a motivation to convert local language content in a digital format. There was no business case, there was no consumption. Now mobile is going to reach to the corners of the country where local language users reside. So your distribution has become democratized. Like he was saying that we want to make internet, make a more democratic internet. So the mobile internet has made sure that there is a lot of distribution, a lot of consumption which can happen for local language content. So there's a big market out there. We are at 140, 150 million active smartphone users. Will be 500 million smartphone users in a couple of years. So there'll be a huge demand of content. And the second thing was there were less monetization opportunity for local language content, where people say, okay, even if I get my content digital, how do I distribute? How do I monetize? And I think few of the examples sitting around the table, I think the case is proven now, and we can rest the case that if there is a content which is in local language, if somebody invests into making a good content on local language, there are distribution mechanisms, there are payment mechanisms. So there is a velocity and momentum of business which can happen by generation of local language content. I'll give you an example. So we do ebooks, okay, now in local language. Now if you're an English ebook supplier, you just need to tie up with 4 or 5 suppliers and you're covered, right? But if you go to local language, there are 18,000 publishers. In 11 languages, each having his own font for that language. So the problem, but if you solve it, I mean, you create such a huge moat around your business which nobody can destroy. And you create a velocity because you have such a huge distribution of customers who are willing to consume the content which doesn't exist in even digital format. Correct? So I think the key thing is, I mean, the trends are very clear. You have consumers, you have distribution mechanism, you are getting tools where you can convert content into a digital format, and you have payment mechanisms. So I think the value chain is coming up and it's going to just explode in a couple of years.
I'll just, this is again a great response. I'll just add one sort of sub-bullet to this conversation. What I did notice in the past maybe a year and a half, along with the availability and the ability to produce local language contents in digital media, in some sense the social has become a mobilizer or an enabler for people to start looking at digital contents in their local language. If I look at my classmates, we have a group on Facebook, we have a group on, as you mentioned, on WhatsApp. A lot of people are starting to pick up the content in local language. They haven't spoken or written local languages on the internet for the past 20, 30 years. But all of a sudden, when you give them the ability, I was counting last night just to see of the last 100 posts on the WhatsApp, how many were in Bengali, right? Out of 100, there are 14 of them, which is actually not a bad number. A year back, it was 0. So the anecdotal evidence sort of that I'm seeing is telling me that social is becoming an enabler for sharing these contents. And once someone else shares, I take that, start sharing it, sort of builds a network effect eventually.
So one other thing that I would like to mention is when it comes to digital, our thought process as decision makers is actually inverted. If you look at any alternate media are the traditional media that we have had so far. Those are like the print media, television, cinema. If you take any of this media, more than 90% of the content consumption in this media is actually in local language. But when it comes to digital, most of the decision makers, us decision makers, are actually literate in English. And we have this myth around us that English being an aspirational language in India, right, all the content needs to be in English. Now, it's only now when we have already reached the max user base of English language, we are thinking of local languages. Now, if English was actually an aspirational language that could replace local languages, then we do not need anything print in a local language. We might as well replace all of those in English and be done with it. But that's not the case. Therefore, apart from all the challenges that we have had from technology point of view, it has also been a motivational challenge. It's I would say, a decision making which has been not based on facts, but in certain assumptions which are mythical rather than reality.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I like to call it the English echo chamber, right? We read everything in English, we talk to each other in English, and therefore we think our world is in English. But anybody who's done traditional advertising or traditional media sales knows that the big market is elsewhere. So now that, and both you and Viru hinted at this, but how the user base has grown very quickly recently, right? About 18 months ago, we only had about 120 million mobile internet users. And it's fair to assume that the first 120 million mobile internet users were English users because, yeah. So in the last 18 months, things have changed, flipped almost quite significantly. So I just wanted to get a sense of, what's the mood in the market towards local languages? How are people reacting to something like this? I mean, both of you have been in the business for a very long time. You were working on Facebook's product, I think about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Until about 6 months back. So what's been the, how has the market changed its perception of this? this field. Maybe you want to take it first, Arvind, and we can go that way.
Yeah, sure. So pretty early trends that we have been observing, the usage of our platform. Let me give you 3 examples. Hdfc Securities application that you just saw. Now that application has been there in English language for 18 months now. And the total number of users of that application in English language are about 100. Now the local language version of that has also released about little over 3 months back, 3.5 months back. And there are already 25,000 users, local language users of the trading application. Then there is a cricket quiz app that is also using our services, which is Mocept. And both from App Store and device preloads, they have close to about 2 million users. The trend that they have been seeing over last 4 months is that the rate at which they acquire local language users is 50% more than at the rate at which they acquire English language users, right? And the average session time of local language users is about 15 to 20% more than the amount of time the English language users spend inside that application. The other customer that we have is Hangama. They have added close to 3.5 lakh local language users in last 7 to 8 months over and above the user base that they have had in English language. So we anticipate this trend to go much, much faster as more contents are available and more options for consumers to have. Today, if you look at a mobile phone, there are very, very limited options available for local language consumption. That is starting to change as we have more and more content and applications, and we will see a lot more usage. And the trend which is there in other media, like 90% of consumption happening in local language compared to English, we do see that kind of a trend to happen over a period of time for local languages as well.
So on our platform, 95% of consumption is on local language.
I remember that number now, 95%.
Only 5% is English, and we do about 22 million monthly active users with about 3 billion page views. This has doubled, over last 12 months. So I think, on your question or call out of how has things changed, how is the interest in the community, how people are seeing. I think the key thesis which everybody is building business in India are two, that mobile will be equal to internet, and mobile internet will be 500 million users. Now, by any statistics, English taps out at 100 million users. So even if you're not thinking English now, but your key thesis of business is large consumer base, you have to go local language. Now, whichever format, whether it's text, whether it's OCR, whether it's voice, there are multiple ways to do it. But eventually you will have to move towards the local language, local language-based application or internet to reach out to those customers. Those customers aren't moving to English language over the next 10 years. What happens after the next 10 years, nobody knows. Yes, English is aspirational, but when a person near Madurai, he goes to a shop, or when a person in UP, he goes to a shop, so, bhaiya kya daam lagaoge? You look at the conversation which happen, right? You look at the tone of the language, you look at how people converse, talk. A good example is a lot of retail doesn't happen in mall. People get intimidated with malls. People go to markets like Chickpet, like Palika Bazaar, like other, because they're comfortable shopping there, right? So I think that gives an idea that how the country is. So broadly, English population will tap out in terms of mobile internet. The large base is lying outside English, and it's for any business to take it.
So I think one of you talked about how the availability of content is becoming democratized. What's also becoming democratized is the ability to generate content. Like today, if I have a computer, if I subscribe to a social site or any other site, right, I can generate my own content and share it across the world very immediately. So for someone who is for the first time come to the internet and started using it, it usually starts through the social networks today. All of a sudden there's a wow factor. Wow, I can write something and then 50 other people around the world can see it. So two things happen. One is that wow factor sort of enables them, and if you get like likes and shares on that, it motivates them to come back and start generating more content. it also gives them, I'll call it the emotional attachment to the content they produce that you cannot get in English, right? Yes, you can write in English, you can share in English, you can do all of that stuff. But the emotional attachment that we have, especially growing up in different states. So I grew up like yourself, 5 states in Northeast. So I can speak Manipuri, I can speak Assamese, I can speak a bunch of other languages, like tribal languages. The attachment I have for those languages, it cannot be replicated by English anytime soon. So that will essentially provide the next set of impetus for growth, right? As people get more attached, as people create more content and find out that this can now be shared and can be read by others, it will motivate to generate more content. It will motivate them to generate more content, and hopefully the network effect from there will essentially start showing up in the next few years. Today it isn't there, it's very little, but as I said, from 0 stories in my WhatsApp feed to 14 today in the last 100, next year hopefully it's 30 or 40, and hopefully in the next few years it sort of starts evening out. That's my hope.
Okay. And so now we've talked about how the perceptions are changing, things are beginning to, there is demand, and demand is seeing engagement, and by those numbers, more than 20 million people, more than 2 crore people are already there using your app in local languages, in their language, right, consuming that content. So the question, I guess, is for everyone, and we'll begin with you, Viru, is if a organization is looking to, now there's so many app developers, so many startups, we've made a very aggressive case that local languages are the future of growth. How should they think about preparing their organization for this? Both in terms of structuring the technology and what they have to do from a product perspective, but also what they would have to do. I think you would speak a lot about marketing and the consumers that consume content in that this thing. Give us a peek into that mindset and how they can leverage this.
Yeah, so local language is not equal to translating your app UI into the local language. That's, I think on the local language, you got to do a couple of things. I think the first thing is your customer support. Guys should know local language. I mean, if your business touches customers, so it's very important that that your customer support. That's the first and foremost thing. That the customer support should know multiple languages. They should be able to read and write and speak multiple languages. The second thing is the guys who are driving users engagement, and the guys who are running your marketing promotions, be it on Facebook, Google, InMobies, or newspapers. I think they should understand the customers, the images, the UI, the language which you use to draw customers to your product. I think it's very important to understand, what attracts the customers, because that affects your conversions heavily. The third thing is that the local language customer's mindset should be integrated in your workflow. So let me give an example. And Shantanu spoke about social sharing and all. Today, on our app, 60% of shares happen on WhatsApp. Only 18% happen on Facebook, and only 18% happen on Gmail. So the medium is changing. So don't expect people to do a Facebook login on your app when you're thinking local language user. So local language is not local only doing Hindi, but I mean there's some very clear trends that if you're going to ask him for a Facebook login or a Gmail login, I mean he could give a Gmail login because on Android everybody needs to have a Gmail login, but he consumes WhatsApp a lot. So you got to figure that out. What is that customer is, right? When you also think of local language user, you also imagine where the user is located. Now, if you imagine where the user is located, and you need to say, okay, what data speeds does he have? So when your product needs to be able to at least serve him, I mean, when we launched that, people say Flipboard has a great UI and great. I mean, you load Flipboard in on traffic versus us. Flipboard never loads, but we load. We may not have the best image experience and a UI experience, but that's what this country is. I mean, you have to contextualize where you are. Now, if you are serving a customer in Madurai or serving a customer in Lucknow, where the network investment is less by mobile operator and it's probably more 2G, then you got to figure it out how you're going to serve it. Right? So think of a local language customer, not only a local language per se. Think of a local language customer on an overall perspective.
So I'm hearing, we're talking about optimizing firstly your product and the data flow, so their device and their storage space and their connection speeds. Also hearing about customer support and basically the messaging to the consumer, both in terms of support and in terms of marketing, needs to be tailored for them. So it's not just about changing their language in that sense. Shantanu, you want to tell me a little bit about how Facebook looked at localization and what were the learnings in that?
It's funny enough, his bullet points and my bullet points are ordered in a different manner, but exactly same set of bullet points. One, assume your network is going to be crappy and optimize for that. Two, assume they'll have a bad phone and optimize for that. Three, assume they will consume contents in local language, so optimize that workflow for that. So our first attempt to do the translation of our menus and all were crowdsourced, right? And let's call the customer service or the equivalent of head of the transliteration service, right? The lesson there is, without going into details, that person needs to talk and understand the language. He cannot be a Russian, in which case, in our case, that was the case. So just entirely miss the context. And the first generation of translations were completely bad. So understanding the workflow and understanding the context and simple things like making sure that your app or your product has gone through a rigorous quality check are these 3 or 4 things that you need to do. Beyond that, it's actually not that hard.
No, fair enough. Yeah, interesting point on assume that they have non-standard phones as well, because we are used to the Samsungs of the world and the iPhones of the world, not necessarily the case, right?
So I'll give you in my prior life, we supported 89 countries, 130 languages. Guess the types of phone you